dishonest manager. Our gospel reading comes from the 16th chapter of St. Luke. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master has taken the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly, for the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, good morning. Good morning. So, I, first of all, am giving Pastor Tom a high five for passing this one on to me. This is the worst gospel message this is the worst parable in the Gospels, says many commentators. And it's just a lesson to me as a newbie to always check the text before you say you'll take it. So, hey, keep learning, you know. One online preacher actually admitted he hated this parable. One commentary said, "This text is notoriously difficult," which I would agree with. Another said, "This is the parable of the dishonest steward poses significant theological challenges." It surely does. I even went and checked out ancient commentary on St. Augustine of Hippo from the 5th century, and he questioned, why did the Lord Jesus Christ present this parable to us? And that certainly is the question of the day. On the good side, I am in good company with other preachers who have struggled on this parable, and I give my prayers to all those new interns whose supervisors happily gave this parable to them, and they're preaching for the first time. But I do accept the shrewdness of my supervisor who passed it on. I would be happy to do so in 3 years when it comes up again. But on the other hand, so I feel like I really can't screw it up because there really is no foundation for it. But on the bad side, I have to say that even with my extensive overachieving efforts and several new commentaries downloaded into my Kindle, I still found this extremely difficult. In Godly Play, we house our parables in a gold box. Our parables are kept in boxes, and we say the same words every time. We say, "This box looks old. Parables are old. They are given to us before you were born. This box is gold. Gold is very precious. Parables are precious. This box has a lid. Sometimes it feels that parables have lids. But if you come back to them again and again, one day they may open for you. Let's see if there's a parable inside." And as I look in this box, I just think, gosh, I'd much rather do this parable than the one I have. But, I definitely was knocking on this parable's door, asking to be let in. So we'll see if we're able to enter into the backwards world of this parable today. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. As I looked and looked and looked at this parable, I turned it upside down, I pulled it inside out. We hear in Luke 16:9, Jesus, I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into their eternal home. It didn't make any sense, so I checked the Greek, which is probably closer to the Revised Standard Version, which reads, and I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous mammon, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal habitations. Otherwise, I had nothing. And there's so many commentaries just on that one verse, and not one of them agrees with the other. So as I turned this verse inside out and upside down and knocked on the lid of the parable door and read it in Greek, it got more and more confusing. And suddenly I was sort of reminded of one of my favorite childhood storybooks, Alice Through the Looking Glass. In this book, a young girl is fascinated with the world inside the mirror, and she notices when she looks into the mirror that everything seems backwards. And here's a modified excerpt from the book. Alice is talking to her kitten, and she says to her, I'll tell you all my ideas about the looking glass house. First, there's the room that you can see through the glass. That's just the same as our drawing room, only the things go the other way. Well, then the books are something like our books, only the words go the wrong way. I know that because I've held up one of our books to the glass, and then they hold up one in the other room. How would you like to live in the looking glass house, Kitty? Let's pretend that the glass has got all soft like gauze so that we can get through. Why, it's turning into sort of a mist now, I declare. It'll be easy enough to get through. She was up on the chimney piece while she said this, though she hardly knew how she had got there, and certainly the glass was beginning to melt away. So yes, we, or at least I, need to step into another viewpoint where everything is backwards and re-examine this parable. When we enter the looking glass world, so to speak, we peek our heads into this familiar yet unfamiliar place. When we look, we see a person who's about to be fired. They are thinking that life is going to go downhill because they have only made enemies with their job. And they'll have to do labor or beg, and that certainly does not seem very appealing. So the manager decides to bring in all these people who are indebted to their boss. And he takes their bills and he cuts them in half. And this manager is trying to save face with all these people. So actually, this seems like a fairly normal activity that might happen because people try and save their reputations by whatever means possible. But as we peer through the mist of the looking glass, and our face enters into another world, we see that the boss comes to look over his manager's shoulder. Not long ago, the boss was going to fire the manager for not doing a very good job. And now the boss watches his manager mess around with his profits. Outside of the looking glass house, the manager would have been fired immediately, or yelled at, or disciplined, or even arrested. But inside the looking glass house, the boss commends his manager for his shrewd dealings. Maybe he likes that his employee is trying to save face with all these people because maybe it makes him look good to these people as well. And then we step to the other side of the looking glass world and we hear Jesus, our Jesus, say, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth. What? We must be in a backwards world if that's what Jesus is saying, because Jesus has said a lot of words about wealth that we hear every Sunday, and none of them sound like that. And then even stranger, Jesus says if you haven't been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches. So does that mean if we mess up our worldly finances or lives or whatever, that the gifts of heaven are not available to us? That's a pretty scary thought. So if we step back into our world again, we hear Jesus say that you cannot serve God and wealth. Now, that's a normal Jesus-y thing to say. But a normal Jesus-y type statement doesn't sound right in the backwards looking glass world, where we would rather make our money and our calendars and our phones our idols. But at least this statement sounds like what we have been taught on Sunday all these years. As we step back out, we glance into the looking glass world. While that world may not make sense, it might actually be more fun to be in it. In the other world, Jesus is talking like how we actually want him to talk. Instead of being scolded for enjoying the wealth of this world, we are being commended for our ability to make friends with our wealth. And we are told that we should learn how to handle our money and our possessions, our clothing, our housing, even though it is of an earthly realm. And isn't that true? By learning how to manage our earthly wealth, doesn't that make us good stewards in our Christian world? If we step out of the looking glass back into the room that we started in, and we are left with you cannot serve God and wealth, the looking glass world starts to look better and better. I think, however, this parable or the looking glass perspective offers something more important. In one world, we hear we should do good things and share our wealth and do good to our neighbor and love our enemies. How backwards is that? And sometimes those ideas seem so backwards to our worldly experiences that we have to go through the mist of the other side. And yet, in the other world, we have shrewdness and dishonesty and corruption, but we get to keep our wealth and enjoy worldly things like homes and cars and shoes. And 6 days out of the week, we stand in that world, and one day out of the week, we stand in another. And now it's getting misty again. And that world is the backwards one, or is it this one? But in the midst of the looking glass is making it very unclear which one is which. Perhaps this parable is really teaching us that there are two realms. There are two worlds that we live in. We live more in one than we do in the other, but perhaps in the backwards realm. Whichever viewpoint you decide that is, requires you not to completely disappear into it. Perhaps you need to straddle both worlds. Being in one but keeping a foot in the other, or being in the other and not allowing the mist of the fake world to cloud your Christian beliefs. Jesus' death and resurrection gives us the ability to move through the looking glass world and change it. Our faith in Jesus gives us the ability to enjoy and participate in the world that we know and yet make it better by being a good steward of our time and our talents and our treasures. Christ's light in us allows us to be in one world and be one who does not add to the corruption or the manipulation of the other. It's misty out there, folks. The looking glass house awaits. On one side, our churchy world, and on the other, an earthly realm. Both sides offer confusing messages and backwards scenarios. Each side looks backwards to the other. The realm of worldly wealth awaits for us to bring Jesus in to change it, to make the world a better place for others. The churchy world awaits for us to bring the earthly world into it so that the world can be changed by the light of Christ. If we live in just one side or the other all the time, we can't share our upside-down world with those who think they are living rightly, even though they might actually be more wrong. Now, I don't know if I entered the parable today. Perhaps it was closed to me, or perhaps it was closed to you too. Or perhaps as we tried to work both worlds out, there was an opening and we took advantage of peeking in through getting lost between the two realms. Which world is backwards and upside down to you? The earthly or the Christian one? Which world do you live most of your life in? And where do you belong? Where can you be the looking glass house for those who live on the other side, creating curiosity about a backwards world? Can you create a space where the door opens and people are let through? I think the message today is to pull Christ into our earthly world and to also pull the world into Christ so that the two worlds become one. Amen.